Robert Hale woke early on the morning of his 70th birthday. The house quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the soft creak of floorboards. Vermont mornings were always crisp this time of year, the fog clinging to the trees like a memory. He stood at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, staring out at the misty world, feeling the weight of years that had passed. Life had been steady, predictable, and yet it had left him with a subtle emptiness he had learned to live with. He thought of Margaret, his wife of 45 years, gone 3 winters now. Her absence was a quiet presence, always there, shaping his days in a way he couldn't fully explain. Some mornings he would speak to her in the kitchen as if she were there, sharing trivial thoughts about the weather or plans for the day. The silence answered back, and he smiled a little wistfully. That morning, a letter lay on the kitchen table, its handwriting elegant, familiar, yet stirring something buried deep inside him. Eleanor Brooks. He hadn't seen her in nearly 50 years. Eleanor, who had been part of the bright, uncontained days of his youth. College in Massachusetts. Dreams that felt infinite and impossible all at once. They had shared long walks, late-night talks, confessions of hopes and fears. And then life had taken them in separate directions. She had moved west. He had married Margaret. Time had stretched and folded, carrying them both into lives they hadn't fully imagined then. He hadn't expected to see her name again, certainly not now, not at 70. The letter spoke simply. Eleanor had returned east. She volunteered at a small art gallery in New Hampshire. Her husband had passed 2 years earlier. She wanted to meet for coffee. No pressure, she wrote. Just a conversation, a chance to reconnect. Robert folded the letter carefully, feeling a rush of emotions he hadn't felt in decades. Nervousness, curiosity, a flutter of anticipation. He told himself repeatedly that he was too old for new beginnings. Yet he found his mind circling back to her words, imagining her voice, the way she laughed. The spark in her eyes that never quite dimmed. Days passed, slow and deliberate. He hesitated, debating whether to reach out. Finally, on a gray Thursday, he drove to New Hampshire, the road familiar yet foreign. Vermont passed in muted colors, the mist lifting here and there, revealing glimpses of hills and towns. When he arrived at the cafe, the scent of fresh bread and coffee hit him immediately. Eleanor was already there. She stood when she saw him, silver hair framing her face, her smile calm but warm. She looked older, of course. The years had touched her, but her eyes held the same curious brightness he remembered. There was a pause, a quiet acknowledgement, and then she said hello. Her voice was gentle, familiar, and it stirred something inside him. They talked for hours, about lives lived and lost, about family, about the ways time shapes people. Eleanor had daughters now. Robert had children and grandchildren. They shared stories not to boast, but to reconnect. To see the threads of their younger selves woven into the tapestry of their current lives. They laughed, remembered, occasionally fell silent, each pause rich with meaning. When the conversation lulled, it wasn't awkward. It was the comfortable silence of 2 people who had known each other once and were finding each other again. When they parted, there was no dramatic gesture. No sudden declaration, just a quiet, mutual understanding that this was the beginning of something tentative and fragile. On the drive back, Robert thought about how alive he felt. The spark wasn't reckless, it wasn't youthful frenzy. It was a gentle warmth, the kind that fills the chest and makes the heart beat with quiet intensity. That night, he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, marveling at the unexpectedness of it. Eleanor had opened a door he thought was firmly closed. For decades, he had believed the past was a place to visit in memory only. Now, he realized the past could be a doorway to something real, something present. Over the next weeks, they began to meet more regularly. Once a week, then twice. Often for coffee, sometimes for walks in the small parks near the river. Each meeting brought new stories, small revelations, shared memories, and laughter. Eleanor had a way of listening that made him feel seen, not as an old man or as a widower, but as Robert. The man he had always been beneath the layers of routine and grief. She shared her fears, her losses, the ways life had tested her. He shared his. They found comfort in mutual understanding, a companionship deeper than casual friendship. One afternoon, they visited a quiet lake. The water was still reflecting the pale autumn sky. Walking along the shore, they spoke about dreams they still held, even at 70. Eleanor told him she feared growing old alone, not because she lacked independence, but because shared moments gave life its meaning. Robert nodded. He felt the same. They walked slowly, hand near hand, not touching, but aware of each other's presence. It was a rhythm neither had experienced in years. The simplicity of companionship, the beauty of being seen without expectation. Robert began noticing changes in himself. He laughed more easily, slept more peacefully, and looked forward to days with an anticipation he hadn't felt in decades. Friends commented that he seemed lighter, more vibrant. Even his daughter Emily noticed in phone calls the subtle shift in his voice, the warmth that had returned. When he told her about Eleanor, she was quiet for a moment, then expressed happiness for him. It struck him as a small but profound affirmation, a quiet blessing to move forward without guilt or fear. They attended art shows together, visited small towns, wandered bookstores, shared meals. Eleanor introduced him to her life, her routines, her passions. Robert felt a renewed appreciation for the small things. The way light fell through windows, the smell of autumn leaves, the warmth of human connection. Each shared moment was like rediscovering a color he had forgotten existed. Their bond grew not from dramatic gestures, but from consistency, understanding, and shared joy. Evenings spent on Eleanor's porch became rituals of quiet reflection. Conversations flowed naturally, sometimes punctuated by silence that spoke as much as words. They didn't rush, didn't force intimacy, but allowed it to unfold organically. Robert realized that this was what he had missed: the ease of presence, the depth of feeling that could exist without demands. The connection was emotional first, a fire quietly burning, steady and strong, ready to guide them forward as the first part of their story came to a close. Robert felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. He was entering a chapter of life he had never imagined at 70. The spark with Eleanor wasn't reckless. It wasn't about youth or desire. It was about the rediscovery of life's richness, the capacity to feel deeply, to care, to connect. As he drove home after another meeting, the world seemed sharper, brighter, full of possibilities he had thought were gone. A letter, a meeting, and weeks of shared time had shifted his world. The quiet fire in his chest was no longer a flicker. It was a gentle blaze, and he understood that this was only the beginning of something unexpected, beautiful, and profound. Robert did not expect the feeling to grow so quickly. After the art show, life seemed to move faster, as if time itself noticed his hesitation and decided to push him forward. He began waking earlier, not from restlessness, but from quiet excitement. Each day carried the small hope of seeing Eleanor's name on his phone or hearing her calm voice in his memory. They did not rush into anything. Instead, they filled the days with meaning. Robert drove to New Hampshire often now. The roads no longer felt long. The trees, the small towns, the open sky all seemed to welcome him. Eleanor would meet him with a smile that felt honest, never demanding, never uncertain. They talked about the years they lost, not with sadness, but with curiosity. Eleanor spoke about raising 2 daughters on the West Coast, about moving from city to city, about learning strength after her husband's long illness. Robert shared stories of Margaret, of building a life that was steady and loyal. Eleanor listened without jealousy. She respected that love had come before her. One afternoon they visited a quiet lake. The water was still reflecting the pale blue sky. They walked slowly along the shore. Robert felt his age in his knees, but not in his heart. Eleanor noticed when he slowed and matched his pace without comment. That small kindness stayed with him. As weeks passed, people around Robert began to notice a change. His neighbor said he looked lighter. His daughter Emily noticed it in his voice during their phone calls. She asked if he was seeing someone. Robert paused before answering. Then he told her the truth. Emily was silent for a moment. Then she smiled through the phone and said she was happy for him that night. Robert sat alone in his living room, thinking about permission. For years, he had waited for it. Permission from memory. Permission from time. Permission from himself. Now, it felt like life had quietly granted it. Eleanor invited him to her home for dinner one evening. The house was modest but full of warmth. Paintings lined the walls, each one telling a story. Robert recognized emotions in the colors: loss, hope, strength. Eleanor cooked a simple meal. They laughed when she burned the bread slightly. The moment felt real, not staged or perfect. After dinner, they sat on the porch. The air was cool. The world felt calm. Robert realized how rare that feeling had become in his life. Calm without emptiness. Silence without loneliness. Eleanor spoke softly. She said she feared growing old alone. Not because of weakness, but because shared moments gave life its shape. Robert understood. He felt the same fear, buried deep under routine and quiet habits. Their hands rested close, not touching, but aware. The space between them carried meaning. Robert felt his heart beat faster, surprised by its strength. He did not act on impulse. Instead, he spoke. "I don't know how much time I have," he said, "but I don't want to waste it pretending I don't feel this." Eleanor looked at him with steady eyes. "Neither do I." That was enough. From that moment, the bond between them changed. It deepened, became more certain. They planned small trips. They visited coastal towns in Maine, shared coffee shops in Boston, walked through parks filled with autumn leaves. Each memory felt like a gift, not a promise, but a moment fully lived. Robert found himself laughing more, sleeping better, thinking less about endings and more about days. Eleanor encouraged him to paint again, something he had not done since college. His first attempts were clumsy but freeing. He felt parts of himself return. Not everyone understood. A distant relative questioned the timing. An old friend warned him not to get hurt again. Robert listened politely, then let their words pass. This was his life, his choice. One evening, as winter approached, Robert felt fear creep back in. What if something happened to him? What if Eleanor had to face loss again? The thought weighed on him. He shared it with her, expecting concern. Instead, Eleanor smiled gently. "Love isn't about avoiding pain," she said. "It's about choosing meaning, even when pain is possible." Her words stayed with him. On his 71st birthday, Eleanor surprised him with a small gathering. His children attended. Her daughters came too. There was laughter, stories, and shared warmth. Watching their families mix so easily, Robert felt something close to awe. Life, he realized, was still capable of giving more. Later that night, when the guests had gone, Robert and Eleanor sat together quietly. He felt gratitude wash over him. Not loud or dramatic, but deep and steady. "I didn't think I could feel this way again," said. Eleanor rested her head lightly against his shoulder. "Neither did I." In that moment, Robert understood the truth that shocked him most. Passion was not about youth or urgency. It was about presence. About choosing connection over fear. About letting the heart speak, even after silence. As the night grew quiet, Robert felt peace settle into his bones. The fire inside him was not wild, but it was strong. Strong enough to light the rest of his days, and for the first time in years, he looked forward to tomorrow without hesitation.